Mark, thank you. This morning, conservative radio host Rush Limbaugh announced that President Trump will win his fight over the census, quote, by hook or crook.
And Democrats are still questioning the administration's future strategy after this statement here by the president.
We will utilize these vast federal databases to gain a full, complete, and accurate count of the non-citizen population.
Joining us to discuss the census as well as the scheduled ICE raids this Sunday, criminal defense attorney Vikas Bajaj. He is also a legal and political analyst. Good morning. Good to have you.
Good morning. Thank you. Thank you.
Lot of debate, of course, over the idea of a citizenship question on the 2020 census. The president dropped his plan to add the question after some court losses, but had also said, well, there's other ways that I can get this information about who's living here in the U.S. And what are those other options the president was talking about?
Yes, just to talk about your first point, you're absolutely correct. The reason why President Trump and his administration decided not to move forward with the court system avenue is because it would just take too long. And we don't have that amount of time because, as we know, the census ballots have already started printing by order July 1st of this year. So we've lost that battle. The next issue would be how to extract information and have the agencies collect that information, present it to the administration to say, well, now we can get an accurate count on how many people are living within our borders. Now, the agencies that will collectively produce and give this information to the Trump administration would be, for instance, Homeland Security, local municipalities, local administrations that actually receive federal funding, perhaps even the Department of Motor Vehicles. Some states, such as ours, allow people who are undocumented and are not citizens to gain their licenses. So that's very important identifying information.
To what end? Because with the census,
yes,
that can directly affect how much funding cities like LA get.
Right.
If you collect all this information and put it together and put together a snapshot of citizens versus non-citizens, can that information also be used in terms of funding for cities, federal funding?
Oh, absolutely. And I think in many ways the knee-jerk reaction is, well, maybe we shouldn't single out non-citizens and create a list, so to speak. The other way to look at that, however, is that there's an enormous amount of funding that is needed for individuals who are non-citizens. And to ask, for instance, for provisions for those individuals who may be detained or may need other social services, there really isn't a pot from which to pick those dollars from. So this will accurately allow the administration and the local municipalities and cities to know how many citizens and how many non-citizens are in their jurisdiction, therefore allowing them to ask agencies for funding, asking the Congress for funding specifically for issues that affect non-citizens living in our country.
We want to turn to the mass ICE raids that are scheduled to happen this Sunday in several cities, including here in Los Angeles, San Francisco as well. What are some of the important things that we should understand about how it will be conducted? And then what are legal parameters involving these immigration agents?
Well, in stark contrast to an arrest warrant, which allows law enforcement officers to knock on a door and then with suspicion that the individual who is subject of that warrant being in the home, they can actually jump into the home. That's what you call an exigent circumstance. We don't have this type of calculus when we talk about deportation orders. These are individuals who have already had their due process, and they're either convicted felons or individuals who have had re-entry offenses and allegations lodged against them on their jacket, as they say. Now, what can happen? Usually, what will happen is it's a knock at the door. And if there's a suspicion that an individual is there within the home or within the business, but they're just not answering the door, well, they're very good at doing this type of surveillance and waiting it out. So it's not the type of situation where any citizen should be encouraged to run away from police officers, federal or state, but it is a situation that will prove quite difficult to apprehend and identify those who have been listed as those that have deportation orders.
What happens to people who become these so-called collateral detainees because they're arrested as the agents are going in after a target, but they end up arresting other folks around them? What happens to them?
Sort of the plain sight doctrine. It's akin to an officer, federal or state, walking into an individual's home or office and conducting a search. And for instance, if they're looking for Mr. Bajaj and they see me, but they may see my wife doing something really bad. Well, that's in plain sight. So the officer cannot ignore that potential crime and has to investigate it. In the same way, we have these collateral issues with these types of searches and investigations and identification. So for officers' safety, for instance, if they enter a home or if they're talking to an individual that may be suspected to be on the deportation list, for the officer's safety, you can bet your bottom dollar they'll ask for the identification of everyone else that's around just to maintain the peace. And if an individual is undocumented or is otherwise wanted by law enforcement for a warrant, let's say, as an example, that individual will be detained and apprehended in all likelihood. So the parallels here with a search warrant or an arrest warrant are there in regards to the plain sight doctrine, aside from the fact that the officers in these situations cannot force their way into the home.
Vic Bajaj is a federal senior trial attorney with a law office based in San Diego. For more information, you can check out his website, follow him on Twitter as well. Thank you so much. Appreciate you being here.
My
this
pleasure.
morning.
Thank you.
Still ahead this morning.